Okay, all right. Great. Next up, we have Fábio Englert Moutinho. Fábio is an Angular consultant from Brazil. He's interested in best practices and is a big fan of Angular's opinionated nature. Sometimes he writes fabulously about Angular, TypeScript, and JavaScript. Seriously, folks, bitovi.com/blog. Find anything by Fábio. You will not be disappointed. When he's not coding or writing for the blog, Fábio spends his free time wondering how everyone else has the time to have so many hobbies. Fábio, get up here on stage, take it away.
So welcome to Intro to NgRx Entity. But before diving into NgRx Entity, I'd like to take a quick look into NgRx Store for those who are not familiar with it. So NgRx Store manages the global state of an application. It is inspired by Redux and powered by RxJS. So you should expect to see a lot of reactive code in it. So how does the state lifecycle look like? Components need to get state data, and in order to do so, they'll subscribe to selectors, which are observables, and they also need to let the store know when some actions need to be performed, so they will dispatch actions. Actions themselves don't do anything, but they are observed by effects and reducers. Effects will perform side effects like fetching data from server or other operations that don't have anything to do with store implementation or the state. And the reducers, on the other hand, the reducer's main goal is to update the state. So they will filter the actions similar in a switch statement, and they'll run a callback function that might or might not receive arguments from the actions dispatched by effects and actions. And then the reducer will return a new state object. So with the state lifecycle complete, how can NgRx Entity help us here? You might have heard somewhere that NgRx has a lot of boilerplate code. I don't know if state management in React does as well, but that's a huge problem in NgRx, and it turns out to be difficult to introduce state management to people who are not familiar with it. So NgRx Entity will be used mainly in reducers and selectors. But what is NgRx Entity anyway? The documentation says it is an API to manipulate and query entity collections. It should be reducing your boilerplate code. It should provide you performant CRUD operations, and it should be extensible. Let's take a look at some code here. Imagine we have we're writing a global state store, in this case, a user store, and we need to manage a collection of users. So the first thing to do is to define the user state interface. And in this example, we're extending the entity state provided by NgRx Entity. So we're also extending it and defining an extra property loading to represent if users are being loaded or not. So the entity state has two properties, IDs and entities. The main purpose of the IDs property is to store the order of the collection, and the entities property will store the actual user data or entity data, and it enables you to access specific entities by their index, in this case, the ID. So the second thing you would be doing is to create an adapter. This adapter is provided by NgRx Entity. So here we're using the create entity adapter to set up our user adapter. it will help us manage the collection and also sort and select data from the collection. We're using the sort by name function here. We're passing it as an argument to create entity adapter, and will be used by the adapter to sort the collection. The NgRx team made a decision here that the sorting would happen at insert time and update time. But usually what you would see in an application with NgRx store is that these orderings would happen, sorting would happen when the application subscribed to selectors. So selectors would be usually sorting this data. So this will give you probably a performance improvement over sorting and selecting. Then we create a initial state with the user adapter and set the loading property to false. The adapter will handle the IDs and properties initial values for us, which will be empty values. And next, we use the create feature and create reducer methods from NgRx store to set up our store as you would normally do in a NgRx application without NgRx entity. So for our reducers here, we use our initial state created by the user reducer, the user adapter. And we are setting up 3 actions, 3 reducers that will be triggered by some actions. So our first action here, load users, whenever load user action is triggered, so on load users, this callback function, the second argument will be triggered. And that function will return a new state object. It copies the current state, and we set up the loading property to true. That's what you usually do without any adapters from NgRx editing. So on the load user success action, we get the current state and a users array. That would be an action that would be probably triggered by an effect. And then we use the user adapter to set the collection from the list of users that came back from the effect. So we are also changing the loading property to false. We're copying the current state and setting the loading property to false. But the setAll method, as all the other methods from the user adapter that manage the collection, it will return a new state object for you. So it's not only managing the collection for you, but also returning the new object. And also we have, as a last example, a add users user success for adding a single user. We use the method add one method from user adapter, and we pass in the user object and the current state. So that method as well returns a new state object for a store. Last but not least, we have our user adapter getSelectors method. It will gives us some common use selectors. So select all will return you the sorted array of users. Select entities will return you the dictionary, and select IDs will return you a list of sorted IDs. Also select total, return the number of entities your collection has. Oh, and by the way, there are all sorts of operations that you could use for user adapter, like remove one or update one, and there are lots of methods provided by it. So NgRx entity, in short, it will reduce the boilerplate in your code because it provides you with commonly used selectors and implementation for managing entity collections. It will improve your application's performance because there's no need to filter in order to access a specific entity anymore. And it will give you performance sorting and CRUD operations in your collection. So I'd like to thank you and give you some extra resources. There's the official documentation for NgRx entity. I have set up 2 applications that will use NgRx entity with NgRx store and also NgRx component store. Component store is the NgRx approach to local state. And there's a last video by Brandon Roberts from the core team. He's a core team member from NgRx, and he explains how to use the NgRx entity with a component store. With that being said, I'm open to questions if anyone has any.
Awesome, Fábio.